Hey everyone, Gill Gross here, and it is time for another mailbag where I answer your questions, hot takes, observations, and ultimately your comments about tennis or anything else posted in the YouTube community tab. You left your comments there. You also left your comments in my Discord server. The link to that is in the description. It is also a 24/7 forum where you can talk tennis. I try to pop in there as much as I can. Kind of wish I were better about going in there and hanging out with you guys. So, that's a goal of mine. But yeah, check out the Discord. This is an interesting week. I feel like a lot of the Sinner Alcaraz stuff has settled down, and I got like no Sinner Alcaraz comments. So kind of a change of pace because, they tend to dominate when they're active and when things are happening with those two at the top of the game, rightly so. There's a lot of different stuff this week in the mailbag, which is nice. We're powered by BetUS. Let us now get into the first question. It comes from Hunter. Do you think Berrettini will ever return to his peak form? Seems like physically he is closer to his old self than he's been so far, and he's played some great matches, but just hasn't been getting the big wins like he used to. Also kind of crazy that someone with a 28-10 record for the season has 3 titles to his name. Impressive, but also just an odd statistic. Well, 28-10 is a good record. So I'm not sure exactly what you're getting at there, that's a lot of titles. Yeah, I mean, that's a good record. You're going to win. It's not weird to have titles, but 3, I know what you mean. I mean, 3 is a lot of titles. But if you look at Berrettini's season, you have this surface thing going on right now, right? And this is consistent with what he's been throughout his career. I mean, 10 career titles for Berrettini, and they're all on grass and clay. And if you look at what he's done this year, since starting his season in March, also missing a couple big clay court events because he had another injury. I think it was another ab injury that he suffered only about a month after coming back. But look at this. On clay, he's 15-1 this year. And I know the fields haven't been that great in terms of what he's played. He won Marrakesh. He won Stade. He did beat Felix and Tsitsipas in Stade. And then in Kitzbühel, he beat Alejandro Tabilo. Yeah, I mean, those fields weren't awesome, but 15-1 is 15-1. So he's been dominant on clay. On the grass, he made the Stuttgart final. 6-3 record on the grass. And then he played Sinner second round, and he played him tight. He played 3 tie breaks against Jannik Sinner, and he just happened to lose all 3 tie breaks, which is, by the way, kind of remarkable. If you look at his tie break record this year, he's 22-9 in tie breaks. So he's got this sweet tie break record, and he lost 3 in one match. Sinner's tie break record, even better than Berrettini's. It's incredible this year. All right, so the point I'm making, 15-1 on clay, 6-3 on grass, 13-8 on hard court. Oh, but that's including the Phoenix Challenger. So if you make it tour level, he's 9-7 on hard court. That even seems better than it is because 3 of those wins are Davis Cup wins where you're looking at, you're not looking at him advancing through a draw. So it kind of goes unnoticed. So if you take away the Davis Cup, he's under 500 at regular tour events on hard court. And he just went through a stretch, Cincinnati, U.S. Open, Tokyo, Shanghai, Stockholm, where he didn't pass the second round. He took a first-round loss to Rune, second-round loss Fritz, second-round loss Fils, second-round loss Rune, second-round loss Stricker before making the quarterfinals in Vienna last week. And look, I mean, he's getting punished for not being a seed at many of these events. You're playing Fils in the first round. You're playing Rune in the... Fils was actually unseeded too. But, you're playing Fritz in the second round of the U.S. Open. That doesn't help. That's going to change, right? He's 41 in the world right now. So, and he has no points to defend. So I think he's going to be seeded come the Australian Open. I think he's tracking for that. And that'll certainly help him out. But ultimately, I feel like it's been a very, very successful 2024 considering the fact that he missed 6 months after the ankle injury that he had at the U.S. Open last year, and then missed a lot of the big clay court events. I feel like he's made the most of what he's had, and he's kind of gotten back into that seeded for slams and Masters 1000s range here at the back half of 2024. I mean, it's been a good season. And, now the hard court stuff is kind of just taken a little bit of sting out of it. I have talked about why Berrettini is better on clay and grass than he is on hard court in the past, so I won't go in as much detail. And I did it after he won the Marrakesh title this year for Monday Match Analysis, and I think I also made a breakout clip of that. So you can find that on YouTube. But essentially, it just looks so much easier to exploit his backhand on hard court compared to clay and grass. And there are other reasons that I won't get into, but I'll just give you this one. On grass, he's slicing his backhand. On clay, he's got that extra time to run around. So you're trying to get it to his backhand, and he's basically just creating a lot of runaround forehands when you're trying to get it to his backhand. Unless you're super precise and you're very, firm with your cross courts into that ad side, or you're down the lines into that ad side, he runs around because he's got that extra time. And on hard court, the slice just doesn't quite do it. It's just not as effective as it is on the grass. And he doesn't really have that time to run around. So he kind of has to hit drive backhands, and that's where he's kind of exploited. I called his match against Khachanov, the quarterfinal in Vienna. I'll tell you what Karen did. Backhands down the line for days. He was killing Berrettini with the backhand down the line. And that's because Matteo has this sort of ad side bias positionally, because he's looking for the runaround. He's trying to protect his backhand. So if you look at where he's split stepping, a lot of the time it's off center to the left. And he's different than, let's say, like Tsitsipas or Dominic Thiem, who we'll do some mailbag questions about Thiem. He's different than those guys because when those guys leave some open court on the deuce side, they're so quick at covering it, and they have pretty sick running forehands. So they've got the foot speed and the running forehands to really kind of detract from that pattern when guys look to kind of take advantage of the open space. But when Berrettini was facing Khachanov, like every time Khachanov just got into a backhand exchange and changed line, Berrettini had no answer whatsoever. That's what happened in that match. All right, next one is from Simon. Hey, Gill, do you follow Karue Sell's matches? And if so, what are your thoughts on his game? Do you think he has a chance of breaking into the top 100? This comment only got 2 likes, but I wanted to answer it. I know that there's probably some crossover viewership between my channel and Karue's channel, although it is kind of a different part of tennis YouTube. I kind of keep an eye on Karue, and I try to watch here and there. I've said this before, but like anyone on tennis YouTube, it's not. I don't watch a lot of tennis YouTube. I've said this before, but between all the time I spend doing my podcast, watching matches, commentating matches, preparing to commentate matches, there's enough tennis in my life that when I have kind of open spaces, I'm not running to watch other people's content on tennis YouTube or listening to tennis podcasts for the most part. I'm just I'm keeping an eye on it. I'm monitoring. And then when something catches my attention, I'll grab onto that. I'll latch onto it. And so I'm definitely very familiar with what Karue's been doing, what he's been up to. And I can answer this question. I've seen enough of his game where I can pretty much answer this question. That said, I haven't watched like a full Karue match, every point, start to finish, which usually before I assess players, I do like to do that. In his videos, it's usually like kind of an extended highlights vibe. He'll show a lot of points, and he'll show, first ball errors and all that, but it's not every point. So, first of all, the content's incredible. So, there's that. And he does an incredible job with the content, and it's such a great concept, and I think it's a great thing for tennis fans to kind of come along for the ride for that. And, it used to be very instructional, and now he's transitioned to this kind of new thing beautifully. And I think on the tennis side, it's also been like incredibly impressive. I think he should be pretty proud. If I'm analyzing him like I would any other player, which I think he would want, and I think the person leaving this comment, Simon, wants. Analyzing him like any other player, not a YouTuber, forget the fact that he does any of that. I would say this, he fights an uphill battle to get in the top 100. He fights an uphill battle, and he's fighting that uphill battle beautifully, which I'll get to in a moment. But he does not have huge weapons. The pace generation isn't massive on the serve or off the ground. So he's not really threatening you with big weapons. And he's not necessarily that explosive in covering the court either. So he's not going to want to grind too much. He's not going to want to defend too much. And when you don't have big weapons and you also don't have great speed, you're fighting an uphill battle, right? Because normally, like, you want one or the other. You either want to be an attacking player and you're going to dominate and you're going to dictate, or you might be a more patient player. You might rely on your defense and your consistency a little bit more, but then you need to be a great mover. And I think Karue has gotten very fit. I think his fitness is great, but he's not a really explosive mover around the court. So what does he have? How does he get so far if he doesn't kind of have either of those things going for him? He's just an absolutely phenomenal ball striker. He's a beautiful striker of the tennis ball. And I think he's built a perfect identity for himself. And this is where I really give him a ton of credit. I think he really knows how he needs to play to be successful. And he's fantastic at taking the ball early. He's very comfortable on the rise. He's really good at redirecting. And he can do it off of either wing, which I think is really important, because if you play that kind of style, that kind of take the ball early, redirect a lot, if you can't do it off both wings, I just don't think it works very well. He's very accurate. He's very precise when he has a chance to attack. I also think he hits his spots on his serve pretty well. For a guy who doesn't have a huge serve, he can still get something out of the serve because he locates. So, it's all about taking time away and kind of moving the ball around the court. So a little bit of Andy Murray in there, a little bit of Andre Agassi in there, a little bit of David Nalbandian, kind of a throwback style. I would say if there's someone on the current tour who maybe I would compare him to, Mimir Kecmanovic. Kecmanovic, I say the same thing about Misha Kecmanovic. I say he's done a great job because he fights that same uphill battle. He doesn't have a huge serve. He doesn't have, massive power off the ground. And he doesn't have the quickness of like David Ferrer, So he's not going to go out there and just be like, yeah, I'm just gonna grind out some 20-ball rallies like that. Kecmanovic can't win like that either. So yeah, I think Karue's doing incredible with what he has to work with, and I don't know what his main focus is right now. I don't know if he can still get a little bit more out of the serve. I know he's worked really hard on his legs and his fitness. I don't know if he can get a little more explosive around the court as he continues to kind of build up his legs. Obviously, the whole like turning pro after 30 thing, like it's kind of an unconventional thing physically. So I don't know where he's at physically. If there's still a runway there for some growth, there might be. I'm not sure, but yeah, those are my thoughts on Karue's game. I just realized that there are probably some people who just listen to that, like on podcast platforms, who are off YouTube, who are like, wait, who? Which is nothing against Karue, right? But like, if you're on YouTube, you know who he is. And I've just realized that like the people on Spotify and Apple Podcasts who might not be on the platform might have no idea what I'm talking about. But Karue Sell is right now at his career high, 262 in the world. And for those who don't know, he has a YouTube series called Turning Pro After 30, where he kind of brings people on the journey as he tries to rise up the rankings and play pro tennis. All right, this next one is from member Video Listener. Video Listener. Is that what you do with my show? Do you listen to the video? I know a lot of people out there do that. All right, same cue as last week. PTPA, opinions, thoughts on their served podcast appearance. So this was one of those things where I actually just listened to it today. It was on my list. I wanted to do it. Then I didn't get to it. And then I read this mailbag comment. And I'm like, oh my God, I still need to listen to that. Very, very informative, very important. And kudos to Andy and kudos to, John Wertheim and producer Mike and the Served crew. And kudos to Ahmad Nassar and Vasek Pospisil for coming on and having a conversation about the PTPA and where they are at right now. So, they talked for like an hour and a half, and it's very difficult to kind of distill my opinions into 5 minutes like I'm going to attempt to do here. But let me give you the lowdown on where I stand right now on the PTPA. First of all, my bias is inherently pro PTPA. That's where I begin, because I believe the players should have an association. The players should have, formal representation that's a little bit more outsidery and independent than the ATP Players Council. Then the question becomes, are they effective in achieving their goals to represent the players, provide the players with some voice and some power to kind of influence the decision making at the top of the sport, right? That's basically what this is. And by the way, let me defend myself on why I'm pro player union, because, and this is true in all walks of life, when workers have no power, when they don't have a seat at the table, they're going to be exploited in some way or another. Whether that's 5% exploited or 10% exploited or 50% exploited. I know that that's kind of a harsh word, and there are multiple levels to it. But whenever there's no equal kind of negotiation, there's going to be some exploitation. Always. So that's why I think it's important that the players have some sort of arm that negotiates on their behalf. But then there's the question of effectiveness. And here's where I will give the PTPA credit. They did go from an idea, basically just an idea, to a real organization with a staff, with Ahmad is a very experienced and seasoned leader in this space with the necessary expertise to kind of lead this whole thing. And they've managed to find a way to raise money so that they could pay the staff and that they can provide the players with certain services and certain benefits. And they have, so that's what they've been successful at. They've been able to raise money or make money, with just through capitalism and different ventures that they've participated in. And then they've translated that into being able to provide the players with certain services, whether that be medical services, legal advice, and then the much maligned hotel status, airline status, access to airport lounges, all these little things. But ultimately, and this is kind of where Andy came in kind of hard on them, it's like, okay, that was never the goal. That was never the impact that the PTPA, or that's not the impact that the PTPA claims to be trying to make. It's not about, I can go into the Delta Sky Lounge, right? It's not, it's supposed to be a whole lot bigger than that. And ultimately, Vasek and Ahmad, they agree with that. They agree that the goals are much larger than what they've been able to puncture so far. And then the question becomes, what is your plan? Because that's really what Andy and John were drilling down here is, okay, we understand what you stand for in theory. We know what you're advocating for, but what are you actually doing about it? And at the moment, here's what they're doing about it. They have hired a bunch of law firms globally to review the structure of the tours. And right now, the only hand in the card that they're playing is if their lawyers come back and say, yeah, you have some legal ground to stand on, so you can potentially take the tour to court on behalf of the players and basically get better terms for the independent contractors that are the players. And that is in the process of happening right now. Essentially, what the PTPA has done is they've basically they've come to a place where they're like, okay, we're exploring legal options to try to actually make an impact. And my question would be, so what happens if your lawyers come back and they say, yeah, we reviewed it and we don't have much grounds to sue? Like, it's legal. Like, is the PTPA like, all right, like, everybody pack up, we're going home now? Obviously, no, that's not what they're doing. But it feels like an interesting plan to me, right? Because it's not how it normally works, right? A regular players union or a players association, then they claim they're not a union, they're an association. So, okay, a regular players association has leverage because all of the players are joined in on it. They're all in on it, right? So if there is, I mean, it's really the threat of labor strike is ultimately where the power lies. But the reason there's a threat of labor strike is because they're all a part of this umbrella. They're all a part of this association. And that's the leverage. And that's kind of what John Wertheim on this podcast was drilling into, like, where's your leverage? Right now, other than the legal thing, there's no leverage because as of now, there's no proof that the players are organized in a significant way behind the PTPA. There's no proof of that. And when there's no proof of that, the tours don't need to take this thing seriously. They don't need to come to the negotiation table and be like, well, they don't need to be threatened by the PTPA. And if there's no threat, then there's no power. The power is in the threat. The power is in the leverage. Where's their leverage? I'd also like them to be a little bit more specific about their solutions. And this goes for all the players and everybody who advocates for anything. If you say you want calendar reform, if you say you want scheduling reform, be specific. What's your vision? What's your solution? If you say the players deserve more money, bring the receipts. You gotta come up with something there. And I believe the players could get more than they do. Could be entitled to more than they currently get. But make your case, right? And sometimes I hear the case being made in a very disingenuous way. Ahmad Nassar recently gave an interview and said the Six King Slam exhibition is proof that tennis players on the regular tour are underpaid. That's the kind of stuff that with Andy and John, there's no way he could have said that. Andy would have bit his head off, eaten him alive. I mean, that's the one thing, like, with Andy and John, you're not going to get away with statements like that where, I mean, come on now. It's well known that the PIF is willing to take a loss on these events because they see it as a long-term investment to, ultimately bolster the brand of their nation and to set up their economy in the future, right? Like, that's it's the long-term investment. Everybody is very clear that the PIF takes a loss on Live Golf, right? They're not making a profit by paying these golfers millions and millions and millions of dollars. They're taking a loss. Everybody knows that. It's very clear. So to say like the massive paychecks that the players were cut for the exhibition is proof that tennis is generating all this revenue that isn't usually going enough to the players. I mean, come on, don't say that crap, right? Like let's be real. So I feel like that kind of stuff completely undermines the PTPA. You shouldn't say that stuff. Keep it real. And I also don't think they should be patting themselves on the back as much. Be ambitious, right? Like, people believe in your goals. People believe in the main things that you're fighting for, but, recognize that you're not there yet. And that's okay, but let's be real about it. Don't snap back at anybody who says the PTPA hasn't been effective by saying that the players get to use the Delta Sky Lounge, right? That's honestly not a great look, in my opinion. All right. Before we get to the next question, I want to take a quick scroll through this week's edition of The Draw, which is my weekly newsletter where I curate the best tennis content on the internet. Sabalenka became number one. It was a really complicated rankings thing. I think that we're going to get some mailbag questions on that. On-court coaching is officially official. The trial is over. That's something that people didn't ask about in the mailbag, but I have a hunch that next week I'll get some questions about coaching, probably something that should be discussed. This was a great clip with Djokovic discussing his childhood. Nice piece on Saudi Arabia's place in tennis at the moment with some really good reporting from Matthew Futterman. Danielle Collins reversing course on retirement. USTA shaking things up. Martin Blackman, who was the leader of player development, is no longer at that post. Denis Shapovalov gave an interesting interview where he talked about some hot button topics like anti-doping, but he also kind of blamed his fitness for why he hasn't been winning as much as he used to be winning. This other one, this clip with Alcaraz, is about his brother Jaime and how Carlitos is kind of worried about the pressure that Jaime can be put under. And then this Dimitrov clip is also about mental health. Very raw press conference in Stockholm where, he really shares some great personal experiences and some thoughts on mental health and just the importance of being open about it. So I really admire Dimitrov for everything he said in this clip. And then there is this incredible Hugo Gaston shot that I got to call last week on Tennis Channel. So that is The Draw. You can go to thedraw.tennis to subscribe. Thedraw.tennis. Link is also in the description. And those of you who are signed up for the email, we kind of wrote a bad caption for the Dimitrov clip where I wrote the word rant and I kind of used it as a placeholder. I didn't mean to keep it, but it ended up getting published. That wasn't a good word to use because I know it has kind of a negative connotation, but as you just heard me share, I'm anything but negative on what Dimitrov had to say. I thought it was incredible and awesome. So sorry about the bad verbiage originally in the email. Comes out every Tuesday morning, by the way. Okay, next one is from Bakugo. What is holding Holger Rune back? He seems to be very capable in so many areas as a player. Other than the decision-making problem, how do you evaluate his ability and level? Fact is, I've answered this question like all year at different points in time. But this has been a consistent mailbag question that's come up throughout the year, which speaks to what this 2024 has felt like for Rune. But in my answers, I've been trying to keep it fresh. I've been trying to say something different every time. I'll continue to do that. I have something different for today. But I also think it's maybe worth just running through some of the things we've already talked about. The first being, and I thought this was a big deal, especially in the first half of the year, what's his identity as a player? What style is he trying to implement? And for a lot of this season, it just seemed like attack at all costs. Try to dictate on everything. Try to hit really, really big off of both wings and come forward. And even the return approach was pretty aggressive. And we saw that it came at the expense of errors. When we talked to Tom Corey with Tennis Insights and we looked at Rune's percent in numbers, forehand and backhand, they both fell below tour average, where his in-attack percentage was way, 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 way up. When knowing Rune's assets defensively and as a mover, it doesn't have to be like that. He doesn't need to be a guy whose attack percentage is super, super high and whose error and whose percent in numbers are lower than you'd want. And by the way, everybody in the top 10 is above tour average, forehands percent in, backhands percent in. If you're not above tour average consistency, you're probably not a top 10 player. And that's where Rune has sat. I don't know what the update is now because that was about midway through the year that we had that conversation. But that was one thing that we talked about. And then, sometimes you see it go the other way. And I've seen this particularly on his forehand, where sometimes he kind of has like a Gael Monfils syndrome, where he's either unloading on it or he's kind of pushing on it. And you're not seeing a lot of middle ground. You're not seeing the 80% rally ball. You're not seeing the sustained pressure with kind of the repeatable trade with the forehand, particularly cross court when it comes to Holger. So that's been something that we've looked at. We've looked at the return numbers. Clearly the return of serve has not been awesome if you just look at the break rate and how low that has been. And it's actually gotten better in the last couple months. But if you want to look at it now, and I'll just give you players who have broken at a higher percentage than Rune in the last 52 weeks. And I've intentionally chosen 6 players who aren't really known as like return of serve savants, but they're all higher than Rune. I'll give you Berrettini, Bublik, FAA, Tsitsipas, Korda, Humbert. They all break at a higher rate than Holger. So those are all things that we've talked about. But I think recently, I've seen Rune play great tennis the last 2 months. I've seen it in flashes. I think the problem is, it has nothing to do with the ceiling. It has nothing to do with the tennis that he is sometimes capable of. It's about the tennis he is sometimes capable of in the wrong direction. The ceiling is fine. The ceiling is high. The floor has to be higher. In other words, the floor is too low, in my opinion, for Holger. And that's got to be, you got to think that's more of a mental thing. I kind of mentioned this on Monday Match Analysis, I feel like, last week, but so many of Rune's losses this year have been blowouts, just uncompetitive. He's not even close. He's too good for that. He's too good a player. But that's kind of what I'm saying. When he's bad, he's really bad. And that is not the hallmark of the best players in the world. There's a reason why Jannik Sinner hasn't lost to a player outside the top 20 in how long? He hasn't lost to a player outside the top 20 all year long. I don't know how many wins in a row it's been. The reason is when Sinner is playing his worst level, it's still good. It's still pretty good. It's not about his best level. It's about his worst level. Holger's worst level is bad. And I think that's what he needs to look at right now. And I don't know if it's a resilience thing. I mean, something that Sinner had to work on with his coaches, and I think this was a big, I don't know if it was Simone or Darren, but I know that they kind of were drilling this into Jannik, particularly first half of last year. When you're feeling physically unwell, you got to be a little tougher. They've said that to Jannik. They wanted him to be tougher. You got to fight through it a bit. You got to not feel sorry for yourself. And I'm not saying that's a specific critique for Holger, but that's the example of certain adjustments in your mindset that can be the difference of, physically I'm not at 100%. So, I'm just, there's a difference there, right? When you're not at your best, are you going to wilt and kind of go out easy, or are you going to try to figure out a way? And something tells me, just based on Rune's results and based on the range of outcomes that you see with him, that it's easy for, I don't know if it's physical toughness or what it is, but something with the mental approach is making it so that he's not always there. I did watch his match against Giovanni Pecci-Pericard today. And I do think it was kind of a tough matchup because the two keys to beating GMP at this point in time are steadiness and finding some returns. And Those are really the two things that I think Holger can struggle with right now. So first set goes to a tiebreak. I actually think Rune played a pretty good tiebreak, and he took care of his serve really well. But he didn't really find any returns. He got aced once on a 147 mile per hour second serve. So shout out to PTPA, who I'll talk about on Monday Match Analysis because he's in the final. But I mean, how absurd is that? But that was the only ace. Rune got his racket on 6 returns, and one of them was an okay return that PTPA still hit a +1 forehand that won him the point, but it was an okay return. The rest were not, and let me be very clear, like, PTPA's serve is ridiculous. So the standard is not that Holger is just going to be constantly making good returns, right? That's not the standard. That's not the expectation. It's just like, try to make 1 or 2. Try to make, maybe 2 good returns. He didn't really make any good returns. He made one okay return, and it wasn't enough. He couldn't get to neutral. And a lot of these were on his racket. So that kind of goes back to the returning. But then, start of the second set, first game of the second set, Tennis Channel missed the first point because they were showing Khachanov Demonor, which was happening simultaneously. But at love 15, you have a serve +1 backhand that Rune takes down the line and misses wide, which is just you just can't do it. You can't miss a +1 backhand down the line against Giovanni PTPA when you have this enormous baseline advantage, especially backhand to backhand. And then he double faults on the next point. And he double faulted to lose the set, which was his first of the match. But another thing is he was winning all of his second serve points. So he had this incredible rate on second serve points won. PTPA was not really able to do anything in these neutral rallies. You can't make those quick errors and let him off the hook. So it kind of felt like a lapse of focus there. And then Rune, unlucky net cord at 1540. Break for GMP, first game of the second. Holger never found the break. Before I get to the next question, quick reminder that Monday Match Analysis is brought to you by BetUS. Big week in the tennis world's coming up. Paris-Bercy, final Masters 1000 of the season. New customers can go to betus.com and get an 150% deposit bonus up to $2,000. Please gamble responsibly and don't harass the players. All right, from anonymous tennis follower. Hi, Gill. Recently, Sabalenka overtook Swiatek at number 1 because both of them got penalized points for not meeting the 6 mandatory WTA 500s rule. Swiatek 120, Sabalenka 10, which is why Swiatek fell in the rankings. What are your thoughts on this rule? I have my own thoughts, but prefer to hear your unbiased take on this, so I will not say my thoughts in this comment so as not to influence you. My main opinion on this is it's a really crappy thing for tennis because this is not how someone should ever become number 1 in the world. I mean, it's just so anticlimactic, and as a product, right? We care about who number 1 is in this sport, especially as we approach the end of the year and there's kind of a year-end number 1 race between these two players, and year-end number 1s matter a lot. To me, it's the second most important thing in the sport after winning slams is finishing year's number 1. It basically means you're kind of MVP of the year, right? In other sports, we talk about MVP. That's tennis's MVP. It should be something that generates excitement and anticipation, and it should be settled on the court. So when you have technicalities deciding these things, that's not good for the sport. When you need explainer articles, like Sabalenka became number 1 this morning, let me explain to you how and why this happened. To me, that's already a red flag. Rankings should be user-friendly, intuitive. This was the opposite of that. And that's besides the fact that WTA 500s probably shouldn't be mandatory in the first place. Now, I understand that WTA wants to incentivize players to play 500s. Well, how does the ATP incentivize players to play the 500s? I'll tell you, they have a bonus pool. They have a bonus pool for the top players. Only top 30 players are eligible. So if you finish top 30 in 2023, you are eligible for an ATP 500 bonus pool. And that means if you play 4 ATP 500s for the year and you finish in the top 6 of point accumulation, you get a massive paycheck. Arthur Fils is going to get a check for $600,000 at the end of the year because he won the ATP 500 bonus pool. He won Hamburg and he won Tokyo, right? So that's how the ATP does it. Seems a lot better. From Catherine. Hey, Gill, I just returned from Vienna to participate in all the retirement celebrations for Dominic Thiem, and I thought it would be great if you could say something about his legacy, record against the Big Three, and what went wrong for him after winning the U.S. Open. I mean, I know about the wrist injury, but I wonder how much of that was mental as well or impacted by his ongoing arguments with his former coach. I think although he didn't achieve as much, what he meant to tennis from 2017 to 2020 was as important as Andy Murray and Stan Wawrinka. He stopped Novak in 2 French Opens, for example. What are your thoughts? Well, first of all, I hope you had a great experience in Vienna. I hope that was cathartic for you to see Dominic Thiem's send-off in the flesh. And you throw a lot my way here in this comment, but I think you are right. I think you're kind of going in the right direction as far as what his legacy really is. I think there's 2 parts to it. First of all, when you look at Big Three foils, Stan and Andy and Del Potro, in Thiem's prime, at Thiem's peak, he was as menacing as any Big Three foil in the history of tennis. And the records, which I don't have in front of me, they speak for themselves. He was beating all of them at certain points. He had wins over all of them. He had good records over all of them for that period of time. Like, I think if you take like 2018 to 2020, I think it looks pretty favorable for Thiem, which is an impeccable accomplishment. So there's that, and there's I think you're right to say that holds kind of an important place in the game. You needed players to challenge those guys in order to kind of make tennis fruitful. And he was certainly doing that in his own way with his own style that I think everybody enjoyed watching. The violence, the power, the energy exertion in his game was very, very one of a kind to him. I guess there's not dimensions to one of a kind. You either are or you're not. And he was. So there's that, and then there's the mountain that he had to climb to get that slam. And I've said this before, but some people look at Thiem finishing with 1 major and they get kind of sad. They're like, oh, what a bummer, only 1 major. And I so disagree with that line of thinking. I'm totally in the opposite camp. I feel like I was able to bear witness to how much he had to fight tooth and nail to become good enough at age 27, which is late to win your first major. Fight tooth and nail to make the improvements necessary to get to the point where he was ready to win a major, which he clearly was. I think 2019 he was very good, and then 2020 he was very, very good, like at a major winning level. I thought he was there for 2 years, which is not a very long window of time. And I understand that there's a tragedy in that, but for a player who had to work so hard to get there, it was always going to be hard to stay there. And I think that explains, along with the wrist injury, a lot of, what happened after the U.S. Open, where, first of all, I think there was this massive energy dump for him. I think it was, there was this huge exhale where he finally reached the mountaintop, and I think it was so difficult for him to do it. I think he woke up every morning thinking about, allowing that to motivate him. And I think it's hard once you get there to continue to wake up in the morning with that same level of fire. I kind of lost my train of thought here. But, yeah, he had to refine his game. And he was always an extremely hard worker. He was always known for that. But where for a while we saw that manifest physically and in his ability to, hit a super, super heavy ball. And, he had a kick serve and he couldn't really hold the baseline. And it made him kind of a clay courter, right? Like his court positioning was really extreme. He had no on-the-rise game. He couldn't really defend his backhand because he had no slice. He didn't really have options on the return of serve. He couldn't keep his swing short. And his shot selection was pretty brutal. And even though, physically he was a monster and he was an animal in terms of his heavy ball striking, he had to refine so much. And to see that those improvements happen little by little by little under Nicolas Massu, so rewarding to watch. And then he got there. He won his major. And he needed to kind of extract, I think, every inch of his potential to win that major. And that's why I never look at his career as a disappointment. I look at it as a massive, enormous success that he should be so proud of. And I know the wrist injury was disappointing because you do wonder, could he, after that kind of 2021 hangover, could he have eventually recaptured peak Dominic Thiem level? And I don't know. I don't know what the answer to that question is, and we never will know. But regardless, I think the climb that we witnessed for Thiem and the triumph there, and obviously it could have gone either way. I mean, Zverev served for the U.S. Open title. I think you have to be pretty happy with what he was able to do, and I'll certainly look back on it fondly. All right. I did not get to as many questions as I would have wanted to in this mailbag, I admit. But I am running out of time. I do need to wrap up. So that'll do it for this week. I'm excited for tomorrow's finals in Basel and Vienna. They're going to be really good. I'm very excited to break them down on Monday Match Analysis. So stay tuned for that. We are powered by BetUS. Hope you enjoyed. Don't forget to subscribe, and I will see you next time.